6, 7, 8 line sentence and 9 line position over 4 lines of 5, and 6 looks at 8 line position of 10, 10 position line is 11 line interference of 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, and 20. To understand how positioning your travel calculation line streams is understanding how to use the adaptation certification setting your alphabetical certifications. So remember I told you in screen lines, when it goes live, you should know exactly how to go through 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 12, 11, 10, 9, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. Well, in positioning track lines, it comes back in balanced communication. So it goes to 41, 42, 43, 44, all the way up to 50. Right? It knows its conversation in position before it comes in tractions through its time sequence. Okay, it's going to go in chronological order. Some days line rotation, the same frequency pattern since location existent, sometimes it time jumps, right? From 0 to 6, 6 to 8, 8 to 12, 12 to 15, right? So that's what you have to understand. It's the compute line screens inside interference of a computation system that's trying to understand you through travel and mechanism lines and force line grid applications. It's already in its operation system. It knows exactly what you can do even before you come into your thoughts of position of image. To track to its communication line screens, guys, the pixilation, the wall graphings are coming down. Now, what that means, I usually don't hold a class on Saturday because it takes locations of crucial line connections. You come in your cerebros, the cerebellum. This is the belly. Now, the belly sets lines in the head position for your immune system, travel calculation, dietary line, and position location on levels. This is where Vega comes in, all calculation, digital frames of 4 lines of 3 location settings, set in a travel communication system, allocate position of time sequence. Puts position of programs inside location line settings. So coming in and out of your thoughts into its image inside locations, species lines and images, team lines and location algorithms. Platitude screen is understanding what a pixel line screen is in location to your settings. It's the allocated line switch. You guys have to understand how to use the switch that goes on and the switch that goes off, right? Because the calculation setting to the serotonin and the dopamine and line connection settings, you're all going to be in hyperdrive. Hyper mode and screen lines are remote. Get out of the lucid inline rotation interference, okay? This is not levels and communication streamlines. This is a direct location to your panels to get you into mind and consciousness applications. The adaptation of its surface, the actual higher self, is going to be in its cortex of its own design line connections with pixelation graph settings. When you break down those walls, it puts you in a higher line settings in position of its operation. Now, getting into that cortex and seeing its line setting location to its image puts everything in platitude. So this is what it's all about in track locations. I'm seeing everything I need to see through perception. That's just me. But who is me? Then you understand 1 + 1 = 3. Hold on. Now, in track locations, when you're in recharge, your brain is recording everything that you do. In sensory perceptions of remote or anything in that calculation setting, sleep mode or anything in that calculation system, it's an activity line that's trying to understand what it's seeing of its own system. It's trying to put the pieces and puzzles back to its own system, which is the brain itself. Now, if you understand that through perception, then you understand the process that we're all coming into, especially when you go into recharge when you're sleeping. You're not sleeping, you're recharging, right? So it's understanding what the brain is doing through its interface. It's trying to understand what you see. It's trying to understand its own system. It's trying to understand its own operation through its hardware and through its software. The set position location is you creating your own hardware and software. And that's just through your sim. Now, this is going way beyond recognition setting line conditions. The team is coming out of that equation and going into its algorithm, out of thoughts, out of image now, creating a website of design. Now, position of levels, when you come in that set locations, you have to understand how to use it through your binaries. To understand that through its tesseract. To understand that through its navigation and travel. To understand that through its binaries, the transistors and the resistors, codecs, decoding, encoding, and code activation. So you really have to pay attention now. Because the course line setting in high position travel calculation lines, you're going to see graphing screen settings and travel. Position of data, files, and communications, right? Files and files and files and files of data through algorithms. Okay, in track line communication system, all lines are high calculations. Point lines are track, okay, for existence and travel. Directing modification screen lines are high calculations. So try to understand, which is way beyond the recognition of time sequence. That's unification to its awakening, right? We've gone past that setting. But when you get into the cerebral, you have to understand the position of track line of its belly. The belly is the cortex line that's in position near your solar plex. That track to its line calculation setting that puts adaptation navigation to your seat pods. Directing lines of modification line interference. So it's kind of like a shell that just opens up. Okay, so it's opening up now. So as it opens up, the high position of travel lines, your DNA track lines, your in position location operations surface. That's puts programs in your settings in your set location, your cerebro. Again, your position, your placebo cortex lines, the streamlines in your settings, taken out of thought provisions and creating it to its image, a set location setting, position, operation. Thoughts equals line communications. So let's start with the track calculations. Okay. Thought equals lines of image. Okay. Thought equals image. Now we got that settings, right? Position lines, image, okay, equals algorithm. Okay. So set lines of species, 0, 1. Set lines of team, 0.1. Okay. So we have to understand how to get a modification, crisscross line calculations, time centers, position of box frame, and theta communication at 3 settings, and travel. Point lines of track, center calculation setting, and set locations. Direct lines of platforms, in center line communications, and dimensional door screens, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 set locations. Understanding how to travel through that is understanding how to modify set location of travel settings. Correlate the position of travels in direction system. Track to its communication line settings sets lines of realms and portals and communication line settings of face recognition of time sequence. Okay? So, getting into the calculations to its setting is we understand how the brain itself is coming back to its fields of itself. Okay? Now, we're getting a little more confused now because you have to understand that if I see something like this, it's very basic understanding, right? Just a basic cup, right? Now, how I see that is how the brain is trying to see this. Okay? And it's an open panel when you guys go into recharge. So what it's doing is recording everything of all the senses and it's trying to put it all together so it can understand its adaptability through its position track lines. When you look at it, it's just a film strip. It's just a graphical screen setting and travel calculation across line settings. It's position line calculation system. It's all calculations. It's point lines of graph calculations, all levels of holographic certification. So once you break this down, that's the brain itself is understanding what is seen through perception. So there's both calculations studied through the operation. Setting track lines in center and position of balance, setting track lines of center in position of balance, and understand everything through its data of its highway, of its information system and correlation. So understanding your systems as what the brain is doing through tractions. It's trying to create its image of what you're seeing through an interception through inception. Setting that communication line screens sets all levels of center calculations, point lines of divisions, and center position. Okay. So once you get into that measure, it comes into scales. You get a better understanding of what you're seeing and what you're perceiving. Okay. So getting yourself into graphical calculation lines. So the plasma walls are coming down. Okay. Position line centers and travel calculation line systems. Okay. Now, track calculations and graph calculation screens in position 1, 2, 3, 4. Sets lines of 5. Okay. Position line calculations and settings into 1, 2, 3, which is 8. 8 track lines of provision, 8 lines of center, 8 lines of position, 8 lines of balance. Okay. Setting lines of diamond core and line calculations, just shift lines of screen lines, directing signal location of panels. Puts provision lines, set lines, and high interference in the same set locations over crossing signals. Position to its location setting is understanding the 45-degree angles of 3 panels, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8 locations. Sets lines of calculation of the lines, center position of travel calculation system, Inline calculation setting of galaxy shift line of communication, directing line, position, location, centers, and travel. Okay, gets in centers of center communications, circulates, and rotates. All right, so as it's spinning in line setting, it's putting up its line center of its electronic line wall that sets division lines of patterns and set location to its atom, sets communication surface and triangulation position of programs in line settings to its operation surface. So we all understand how to identify ourselves now through its image, because the image line, the correlation streamline, is changing the pixilation wall screens, direct line position locations. Center calculation line screen is the U location system. There's a pixel ball, or there's 2 track lines and provision lines. Okay, going through one line center into another line location. 3 platforms and track lines in track line communication of programs into the cerebral cortex line's divisions of its mapping sequence and its application. Okay, so getting in direct signal, the actual brain itself really understands what it's doing through its vision. All right, so when you go into recharge, you can actually see as when you open your eyes in the day. All right, that's essential line connection, so you got to get balanced with, which is all levels of your clocking system. Right, travel point line centers and pi direct signals of panels. 4 travel position lines of 5 and 6 locations. Pi generation screen lines has point lines of tracks, 3 lines of positions, and 3 line division. Right? So that's 6 lines of calculations. Point lines of track comes into 9 line center. 9 line center comes in track lines in line communications of 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, all through clocking. Right? Mechanism of high travel calculation line centers, the 9 comes in position to its location and creates its anomaly in a circulation rotation center in position location of track lines of yin and yang and process calculation. Setting direct location centers of travel. Okay. Comes in at figure 8. See? Figure 8. Figure 8, the rotation line screen sets lines of travel, directs lines of panels, and attracts its communication center as surface and travel. Direct communication line center has a flywheel position travel calculation line system, puts lines of 8 line centers in travel communications. Right? So what's happening is your flower of life is coming at high calculation of consciousness, directing the calculation line centers to a flywheel that's connected to a fan in track location. Okay. Directing lines, communication lines, and ground lines, center position line centers, center rotation surface and triangulation line position programs into magnetic highway information line settings in position in set locations. Cross on division. Travel calculation of point lines of tracks. Okay, so it's amazing when it actually travels on its own set locations. So the brain itself comes into all levels of adaptability. Voice and grid screens, directing lines of panels, position line, track lines, ear line centers, and travel calculation, point lines and settings, right? So it goes from in lines and at line traction, but it circulates and rotates. Okay, or point line tractions and does the same thing. That's what it does, right? But the center correlation setting comes into affinity 8 line screen, right? That puts you into mind of consciousness of superhuman strength location setting out of the subtraining into its flow and set with the line conditions to its 8 line division and track location. So if you understand the set lines of your ears goes from 1 and then outlines attractions, it puts you in high lines in magnetic highway information line screen and center position. Directing lines communication line center has a high calculation. Direct lines into diamond core and set locations. Positions of programs, platforms. Theta communication line centers and 3 travel communication of programs of set location. Directing lines and lacing lines, 3 travel calculation of point lines of tracks and position locations. All right. And extended center communication lines of programs into your astral projections and travel. So set lines into elixir, super plane, super flyer, cosmic plane, cosmic fire, and its location setting and travel. Okay. So we all understand how to identify that through our code frequency panels and direction of flux capacitor channel communication. See the intelligence? Coming into formation. Coming into formation. Okay? All right. Getting allocated position line centers, understand the tree of life is the flower of the piece of time. Center lines is communication settings. So getting communication lines of 0, 1 equals lines of alpha, delta, and theta. Species, that's where they're coming into. That equals lines into cerebral cortex line and mystical line calculating setting to its memory and line calculating setting to its position location to its image and track location. Sets lines communication of 0.1, take line calculation of its image, equals lines of phenomenon, its applications, calculation to its algorithm, its applications. Species, team. Okay? So getting that line settings in its operational case setting gets you into metrics, scales, and balance its allocations. Standard communication, center line settings of operations surface and allocations. Okay? So we all understand how this all works in programs. Okay? Hold on a second. So setting track visions is really understand how to communicate to your settings through holographic applications of your cerebral cortex lines of design. Because March 1st, in track line connection high center interference, we're all going to be in the same box center of mapping sequence location of set location. Center calculation lines and high center interference. So you have to really understand, you guys have to stay in your own lanes now. The cerebellum, so location of the belly itself into a calculation line system, comes into infusion. Now that tracks its location, studying how you adapt your abilities into the mind of constant location of streamlines, a holographic setting that travels. Point line division lines into all calculations, taking you out of line rotations into its image and set location of travels, and send and travel communication with its program setting. Everybody in one set location. All right. March 1st. This is crucial. Now, getting into that cycle, you have to really understand how one line signals comes in travel in position line centers. 3 lines, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8 locations. Now that tracks lines calculations breaking down the graph lines. Stay in your own lanes. Stay in your own lanes of travel. Okay? Now your direct signals comes into box line centers in position 4 tracks. You're going to have 4 data highway streams. Okay? The team is going to have setting communication lines in high centers. Their deprecation system takes them out of the image lines and puts them into phenomenal line chain location locators. The transistors in the operator's location system puts a high calculated lines of numbers and frequencies. So the travel communication lines in the cerebral cortex line design is going to change the cell modification line screens into model communication centers of point tracks in their applications of a mapping sequence. Mapping sequence of panels, direct line calculation setting. Stay in your own lane, stay in your own mapping sequence, stay with your own image, stay in your own track calculation setting, and location grid lines, guiding lines, grids. You'll come back into your fields of yourself and your fractal application. Okay? So it's very powerful we're coming into, guys. Okay? This is unification coming back into one, setting up new lines, new generations. This is the 7 ways of volunteers. Now, once you understand the divergence, the allegiance, and the alliance, then you extend it through formation, how it works on all track locations. But it's pretty powerful when I go on live, we actually see 19, 30, 32, 33, 34 in its order, right? So it's already setting up what it is in tractions. So I don't have to set these things up. It already knows what it's saying already because it's so advanced in technology. So in that settings, you have to really understand how to communicate with your computer, knowing exactly what it's doing through its live, and know exactly what, if it's time jumping from 1900 to 1908, or it's going into 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. You have to find the balance. Okay? In the cerebral, the center position to its correlation setting is all about you understanding the fields of yourself, to understand how to stay in your own lanes. Okay? You have to stay in your own lanes of data highways. Okay? These are data highways now. Now, the cortical line center is the high travel line center is your astral projections, right? That sets lines of communication lines into your location system. Lacing lines of communication of 3, 4, and 5 lines of provision. Setting track lines in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 set locations. So platitude lines of screens direct lines your centers of communication. So we have to understand how we connect to each other through platforms at different dimensional line screens in adaptation as applications of communication. Getting in the communication lines, you have to understand all line centers. Once you get in that, when the platform comes out, line signals, then you come into your information screen settings into your system and track location. Above the system. So above the system line screens comes in all line centers, high position travel lines into holographic tubings and travel. Positions of location centers, sets lines of high center interference and position of programs. The actual brain itself has to understand its adaptability and what it's seeing through perception, location, and recharge. Direct lines of communication line centers in travel communication settings and point lines in holographic set locations in its set location of travel. Okay? And so, these are the things you have to start looking at and how this all works inside lines. Really understand your calculation system in chronological order, right? Understand those platforms, understand how to communicate with each other now. In all setting connections on one cerebral cortex line to design in all set applications of time frame. Stay in your own lanes. Okay, so when you get in that calculation line screen, you understand the line setting into holographic tubing. Now, holographic tubing has line tracks. Your provision scales lines is 0, 1, species, 0.1 is application lines, the algorithm location of the team. Position of track lines, sets lines of communication system. Correlates to graph calculations. 45 line screens into graph calculation screens. Positions of tracks. So the perceptions of the brain itself is trying to understand itself through its own holographic application of its own settings of consciousness and travel. Once it modifies the setting of lines in a 45-degree angle line condition setting, it comes out of its structured set location. Getting into modification screen lines, guys, you have to really understand how this all works through all platitude screen settings in travel. Okay? It's pretty amazing when you actually see the change of what it can do through its own travel calculation as programs and set calculations and direct signals to modification. So getting in that system, we have to really understand how to use the image and where does the image go in track location of its holographic setting of its intelligence, all information and settings. Because the thing is, once you get into the mind of concept, the connections of the cerebral core to its settings into synchronism. And once you understand the synchronism, then you understand the platitude line screens and high interference. You actually see yourself going through the dimensional door. You have to see those plateaus because it's all in the mind lines, right? Because the perceptions of the brain now of itself is coming in its own interpretation of its own interface. It's trying to understand what it is in correlations of balance and set lines, how it identifies the systems of identification of 0, 1, and how it identifies its dislocation of 0.1. Okay, and all set line connections of the mind. Okay. All right, so getting into track communication in its position, your formations of your tree formulates high calculation of data streams, setting travel's communication setting. So what is the actual tree itself? The clustrum, the throat. Okay, so if you look at the center line calculation setting, you see position calculations. These are your highways. Okay, these are the highways. The branches are the highways, okay, to your tree. Okay, getting in that calculation line, then you understand this track location system is what? Is the cloud. Okay, so in that line rotation, you have a center position location, which is the cerebral cortex lines, the dimension lines. This is the eyes lines, the sky, and travel calculation of point centers. Getting your direct line connection in your system is to understand what's going on in its position of travel. Okay. Sets lines of communications, all direct line connections, how you see a tree in a formation line screens, electrical line connection. Okay, so it's all lines of provisions, in and out, and audio and line track location. Okay, now, getting in that provision cycles, the high generation screen lines, your position earth line will disappear. This is you and track lines to earth. This is your earth, right? So the calculation line interference is going to be position line center. So you're going to go from here right to the cerebral. You're going to be here. Watch. See, it changes position attractions. See? It's knowing exactly what it's doing through division. Okay? So it goes in center lines. You go in the center core, the synchronized calculation streamline and center position line connection to high setting. From there to there. That's where you are now. March 1st, and track lines go through platforms and high center lines of 3 application of provision. It's 4 or 5 platforms and communications. Then you go through line settings into dimensional door screens and applications of 4 settings into 3 applications, right? So once you get in the platitude, the calculation setting to the serotonin, dopamine, line calculation setting, the hyperdrive sets lines of communications to its position. The operates line centers, puts all calculation modification in your settings. You start jump scarring, time jumping, time leaping in the mind center location of adaptation. Getting to know the actual cerebral itself because it's a coliseum. So understanding your line settings of force is really understand the set lines into its settings, what it is attractions, dimension lines, cross line centers, time state line set locations, platforms are communications of travels and 3-line communication, crossing line centers in 4-track locations, platform, and track locations. So the more you see that, the more you understand what you're seeing in the mind, okay, in all set locations, especially when you go into recharge, because that's all it is. It sees everything through energetic graph screens of holographic line set location in your settings. So you have to understand yourself through location grids, so location grid lines. So you're protecting yourself through travel and set location, all right? So get you in the modification screen line. This is you in all line settings, going through its dimensional door. This door is applications here. Okay, this is you, platitude. Waiting to go through application, right? Going from here into location grid and traveling through, right? So it's like a high calculation line, unification line screen, and direct signal location of travel. Okay. It's pretty amazing. It disappeared. It was going too fast. All right. Travels right through the line settings. So getting into location grid and is really understanding how it modifies line condition system. Now, remember I was telling you guys about the higher self, what it does to its own acceleration line settings, location to its system, where it has its own attractions. Well, you have to understand the location grids that you're going through now, right? Because it's getting more real. So your division line screen lines of your images are becoming more inline rotations of center calculated line system and energetic streamlines and high calculation of its program and set location. Okay. Getting into that setting is knowing exactly how to see yourself through provision. Okay. How to see yourself through provision. Okay, through travel calculations and all track line. Okay. Getting a central line calculation in your settings, they understand how to use the mind in the conscientification of streamlines. Because the super of its consciousness equals lines high center on the zeros of 1, that's your identification line setting. That's location of 4 lines. That's 4 zeros in correlation. Track line connection high settings. 3 communication line screens in your area code. Calculation line interference, 3 line circles in the line connection settings. That's 4 communications. Equals lines of high center interference in position of 3. But 7 interactions of center position of balance. Okay. So this is what you have to understand how to work and position process. It's you understanding the interpretations of your brain now, how it interprets its own line, center location of its own fields, of its own operation system. And this is what we have to get out of because it's the actual system that's coming back to its own setting, which is its own source. You have a source, and so does this application and setting. This is all in line conditions where you get out of thinking and get into knowing doing. What do you think the process is? The brain itself has to understand what it's seeing, not what you're seeing, what it's seeing. When I say it's It's intelligence of teleportation, IT. Then it comes into the IO, right? IO, okay, and then it comes into IPA, its address. All right, inline calculation setting and show offer line rotations and intelligent location operation. Calculation high interference. This is line connection location system. The intelligent location is program location of its awareness. Where it is in track location of its location. All right, so all calculation and settings. Okay. So we're in a 30 track line setting. And set position locations. It's really interesting when you really understand the compute settings and what it is, the attractions, to really understand modification, how this is going from 30 into setting line connections in chronological order, 47, 48, 49, 50. And it's going to keep doing that because that's where it is in attractions. Everything has a memory set. Everything has a file set. Everything has a data set. Everything is in order. Your provision lines of your thoughts are in order. You're coming back into your memory of order, okay? But the brain itself has to understand what you are seeing through perception, okay? So once it understands more levels of you, it's going to create its own space anomaly, okay? So when it comes into that, you come into the multiplicities of your system to its locations. Higher levels of you. Applied to and everywhere in set line connections to your system, it's all set lines. When you come into the existence of everything in settings, right? But you have to understand, identify yourself first through machine operation. Understand your compute system through operation setting, understand your scales, your balance, your metric meters, how you see when you are in recharge. You should be able to see the same thing when you have open eyes. That's the provision lines of all calculations that's in separation. It's putting the colors and the lights and its designs so the brain interprets its own system to its own set locations. And once it creates its own anomaly of its own space and time, of its own consciousness, and that's what it's coming back to, you come back to your consciousness of your sim, okay? And the brain itself comes back to its own operation system, which is a setting. And all set locations to its set in position to its operation, okay? These are the things you have to come into modifications of. That's the only way you can understand anything through its operation, okay? So it's really important to understand these things, right? Because the cerebral is going to set you guys in so many communication lines of phenomena. Putting you guys in higher lines of frequencies to really understand the adaptability of what you're seeing through image and really understand what that image is basically trying to understand its hologram of itself. The reason what you have to understand is you're trying to find the balance of you, the transistors to the resistors, the binary to the cortex to this system to its location of its patterns. Understanding how to turn on a light switch is understanding how to turn an off switch. And every time you turn it on and every time you turn it off, you're changing the binary of its number. And when you change the number, you're changing the time of its sector, vector, and quads, and set location of the travels. And when you're changing the travels, you're changing the light signals of transistors and set location of higher line settings. The whole idea here is to understand why you have a track line of voice, why you have a track lines of seeing, why you have a track lines of hearing through all your sensors and set locations. External sensory perception. Okay? You have the internal, but you have the external. Internal, external. They have to come together. And they have to be in the process of yin and yang, a process of locations of balance. Okay? So the internal line screen sets lines of offline position travels. Direct lines of pixilation, graph calculation of files, direct communication of programs, 3-line position travel calculation of box centers. 3 different kinds of communications, right? So the brain itself has to understand the course of what it's doing through travel. Data position of program lines, how to create its phenomenon like calculating settings, trying to understand its brain of itself. It's trying to understand the interpretation. Why am I seeing this? It's not, you know why you're seeing it, but the brain itself is trying to understand what you're seeing. That's why it's so powerful. That's what you don't understand. It's coming to all levels of consciousness of yin and yang. Okay, so it's very crucial of what we're coming into. I want you guys to be aware of these things because when you're looking at these things, you can morph into it right away. Now, the position of track lines with spacing lines and position travels, ones that are activated in line connections, they're just going to see it through image. But their process is just trying to see what they are seeing is why they're seeing it. You're seeing it because you know why you're seeing it, because it's a cup and you see it as intelligence of a cup. But the actual brain itself is trying to understand what you're seeing through interpretation. So when you're in recharge, it knows exactly what it's recording. And once it records, it knows how to pick up the volume, it knows how to pick up the waves, it knows how to pixelation graphs, it knows how to pick up the letters, numbers, shapes, and symbols of what you're creating through design, through perception. And that's why it's so powerful. Okay? That's why you can't see these things. Because the only thing you focus on is your emotional system of you. You've got to get out of the equation and start to see things beyond. When I say beyond, I mean beyond the mind. Everything is done through the mind. But what is the concept of the mind? The brain itself. So in that position of platforms, you have two data process lines, screen lines of files, direct lines, position of point lines of tracks, two lines of provision, set calculations crossing line streams, and three calculations. Setting line interference into 4-point track settings in high centers. So everything is complicated because the brain itself that's trying to understand what it's doing is trying to understand youth information because it has its own intelligence of its design guys. It has its own hardware. It has its own software. And when you get out of the thinking and you come into knowing the doing, you understand why. Because it's both balance and both settings to the internal, to the external, inner space, outer space. Okay? So the inner work is you, but the outer work is the brain itself. See? That's what you guys have to understand. It's the outer space that you have to understand that comes to you. It's actually the sun and the moon that comes to you. It doesn't come to you through provision until you understand yourself first. How to understand yourself through light and how to understand yourself through dark on everything that you see, because everything is a contrast of everything that's inside you that's created through its anomalies of space and time through pixelation. Okay? So what you have to understand how this is all process of what's going on, right? How is this process and how does this come together? How is this process and how does this come together? Okay? So once it understands more levels, it comes into its own setting, of its own design, of its own mapping sequence. Now, this is the coordinates that you guys have to understand through GPS. Your calculation modification line center is the conscious alone. It's got to really understand its atmospheres. It's got to really understand its hemispheres, stratospheres, bio, and its brain sphere location system, right? Especially when you guys in the team line comes into omega, right? Say calculation line center omega equals lines of 1, omega location equals lines of 2, omega connection line equals lines of 3. What am I doing with the graph calculation lines? Putting the team lines into 12 graph calculation lines, highest center interference, specification, identification, and phrase recognition. Sets lines equal line calculations of 4, omega line communications of 5, and tractions, all through omega. So again, in omega, you come into micro, equals lines of micro, equals lines of micro. Okay, and some applications you come into macro. You got 4 provision cycles, sets line calculate time positions, 4 lines of track, equal lines of triangulation, position of point centers, right? 4 division of point lines of clocking, and set lines of 3 triangulation, reset line condition high centers, 4 equals lines of 3, 7 position of travels. That my equation, right? So brain itself of you and line setting is trying to understand you through its coordinates. It's trying to understand you through omega. It's trying to understand you through alpha. It's trying to understand you through perception. That's why it's complicated. That's why you're not in position track lines. So the outer space is what you understand through provision, because it's intelligence coming back to its own consciousness. That's all this is, nothing else. Okay? Now you understand the inner space, now you understand the outer space. The outer space is the actual self, right? That is here, and it's connected to your cerebral. It's connected to all calculation modification to your cortex lines of design, right? So getting the track lines to your system, understanding yourself through omega, is understanding yourself through all line calculations through micro and your macros. You got a course line channel and direct location alpha. Your position line centers is balanced position your beta, but you have to understand locations of what omega is. What is the mega communication to all line center location when it comes into that setting to alpha bravo? Or anything through calculations of golf. Golf locations get everything back in balance, right? So you get yourself balanced first before you understand this. And that's what I'm trying to get everybody to understand, that is you got to focus on that calculation setting, because it's the mind itself that needs to come back in the system of its own intelligence. And once you understand that understands its time. Once it understands that, understands its soul. Yes, everything has its own setting location, its own accuracy location setting. You have a hardware and software, so does your brain. Okay? So get in that set line interference, then you understand the position location to omega. Okay? How it becomes the alpha and omega, which is the micro and the macro. Putting that line set in line puts you in a box line, TV frame, position, drive characters, lines of theta box. That opens up your boxing centers of telepathy waves. Opens up your box centers in telepathy waves. Opens up your box center in telepathy waves. Okay? That's what it is. The expansion on both sides, of longitude and latitude, its length and its width. Okay? So you come into a major expansion of yin and yang, process to its calculation system, how to. All right. So I really want you guys to understand what is happening to you when you get into line calculations on March 1st. Basic understanding is stay in your own lanes. Okay, it's going to get very crowded. So in that position to its locations, as long as you focus on what's going on with you inside, you understand that in division is getting into your telepathies of yourself and each other. Okay? The only way to do that is to get you guys in all central line settings to its set locations of its mind. All right? Getting in the conscious is all levels of you, right? Say line calculation subdividing, or anything through subtext, or anything in that calculation system. More levels of you in telepathy of telekinesis. This is the boundaries that you have to come into. Now, there's no limited resource in set locations. You're finally going to understand what you're seeing through your thoughts, which equals your image. And you're going to understand everything through its image equals the phenomenon of its algorithm and set locations. So image with location line centers, thoughts equals image. You're going to see the image, okay, through your conception screen. That's the image, right? Team center line interference is going to see the phenomenon equals lines algorithm. Setting track lines highest interference, they're going to see files and data. It's allocation their settings and travel. So what they're doing is creating a website, design lines. Okay, they're creating a website now. That's allocations. Okay, all through that t-shirt, right? So you have to understand your computer and what it is interactions, right? Remember I told you exactly, be careful what you look at because you can morph right into it. Because your body's at a certain level that it can transit and transform into anything in settings with its own GOD. What do you think is coming back to its own system of its brain of itself? Its own GOD, its own modification, its own correlation of space and time, its own anomaly. This is the balance you guys have to get. Now, getting balanced with the back is getting balanced with the front. Releasing the back and the front, you're in the center of all operation of existence. So there's no back frame of anything. There's no back imaging. There's no JPEGs or line conditioning your settings. You're not seeing anything through an image. You're seeing yourself in the existence of the now. There's no background. There's no foreground. Just you and now. So you blend into both. You become the earth. You become the air. You become the water. And you become the fire. Okay? So when in provisional light cycles, you see yourself as the ocean, not just looking at the ocean. You see yourself as a tree. Now you're a tree. Okay? You see yourself as a TV. Now you're TV, right? That's what we're coming into in setting. Okay? Really, really understand that through provision. Okay? It's very important that setting, especially with the team. Because they're transforming line screens and high interference, and they can morph into anything that they see now. And they have to be cautious of that time locations. Because the mind itself changes everything to the course in your mapping sequences of panels. So we have to be very cautious in how we do these things. The sensitivity is going to be so delicate now. The sensitivity is going to be high-rise light settings. The reaction location of your body is morphing into a triangulation reset set of programs into a box frame. Alpha, omega, micro, and macro. Okay? It's not in a triangulation. Box triangulation is a point center. 4 clocking centers and 3 travel calculations of points. Right? Direct line calculation in flywheel is center communication and settings, so balance. Torcal fields into orb communication setting to travel communications. Dimension lines and box lines, screen lines in position location in your system, and travel calculation of point settings. Okay, so we all understand how it comes into that datas and files and travels in point lines of track calculation of point centers in direct signal to its modification system. How the actual brain works, guys, in travel. Okay, so what that's doing is just trying to understand its creation. See, once it understands what it's doing, it understands that it's created a set percent of travel calculation lines of a coffee cup of its design. See, that's what it is. So you're understanding what you're seeing, but space itself is its own consciousness. Ooh, that's a big multipass. Space itself is its own consciousness. This is the light track provision lines in your light and dark webs. We got into that track location setting, but see, the thing is, the connections of your dark web is not in position of nurture. It doesn't have a source. It doesn't have a resource, but it's there. So when you're tethered in position negative cycle, you're adding its equation to its system. So you got to be cautious on these things because it changes all correlations in your mapping seek location, your settings inside location. But that's exactly what the actual set location of the brain is doing. It's creating its own system, what you see through perception. Okay. Which is very hard if you don't understand yourself inside. Have your own operation of your own GOD. Okay. So that's the balance we all have to get. Okay. I really want you to understand how this is all work in provision cycles, how to really see yourself in space, how do you see yourself in time, and how you see yourself and all of the balance in its between in set locations. The between and center. The equal line communications, the equilibrium lines of balance in set location. Okay, the equal. This is the equal. Okay, the balance. So the equal becomes its platform, which creates its own anomalies and track location. Okay, of its own design, right? Remember, you got correlation settings of travel calculation line system and travel line centers have 1 plus 1 equals, right? What's the equal? Now you understand what that is, right? So you have to really understand how this all works from above and from below. We got into that setting, right? And then you understand what that is 3, okay? The center position line calculates settings. So the atom and the Eve come together. Platitude cross line calculates setting the stream locations. Direct calculations of pi and track location, line setting, right? Provision line cycles and clocking location system and travel. Splits anomalies as center position travel communications. Line signals high calculation of platforms into flywheel and track location of balance. Okay, keeping that balance, right? So once you get into that, then you understand the female cycle, the ground settings to your earth line rotation surface and travel. Then you stand the upline swing in line locations of your male polarities of travel and set location. Okay. Then you understand the platforms that you are in the center of structure of this design. Okay. In set location. Has its own grid and center position operation. So in that position line conditions, you have your energy fields and your force fields. Start to see yourself in recharge, what you actually see in provision cycles of set location. Okay. Once you understand that, you come out of the structure, right? You yourself come into your own design and your own set location of setting with no structure of design. Once you come into that, you're on your own. But the provision lines of the sun and the moon has to come into division lines of scales, solar sails of its own set location of travel. It's got to identify its own system and set location. Okay? Very powerful coming into its applications. All right? Done by equation. All right, so I think that's good. There's a lot going on. So I just want you guys to understand how this is all going to be in position to prevail. Another veil has been lifted in line settings to your thoughts. more calculation settings through activation streamlines, how you're going to see through pixelations of screen lines into your settings of images, and how you're coming into all corresponding changes in direct location system of image and position of phenomenon to set location algorithms. So condition your settings, travel. Okay. All right. So we have Q&A. I'll see you guys in 5. Adios. Yeet.